How's it going, everyone? So recently I was actually able to go out and shoot the fall colors, which is something that I don't normally get to do because of how busy my work gets around this time. But I was actually able to get out and shoot. And I thought it might be an interesting thing to show you how I edit my fall photos or autumn photos. I thought it might be interesting to show you how I can take a photo that looks like this and turn it to this. Basically, the goal of this photo in particular is to get it to be more punchy, more interesting, but also still keeping the realism, not changing the colors too much, not showing it in a way that it wasn't when I took the photo. Sorry if you can see my breath. I don't have heat in this room yet. I'm working on getting heat in this room. For now, it'll be cold, and sorry if you can see my breath. So I got this photo into Lightroom, and now the first thing you can do is you can hit auto and just kind of see what Lightroom might think this photo should look like. So that's not too bad, but we're going to work down the line and see what we can come up with. This looks pretty good, but I'm gonna take a stab at doing it fully manual. I'm just gonna hit Control Z and get rid of that. Now you can either edit it one of two ways, or both if you want. You can come down to the tone curve and start adjusting it and making it, you know, do a little S curve, however you want. But I much prefer to just edit it from these little tabs. I don't touch the tone curve all that much. Sometimes I do, but for the most part, not really. I like to mess around with these sliders. So the first thing is the color's a bit off and it's a little underexposed. Now, to be fully transparent with you, this photo is actually a comped shot. I took multiple different exposures at multiple different focus points and I comped them all together. This shot that we're editing today is just one single raw photo, but it actually turned out pretty good. Everything is pretty much in focus, and that's what we're gonna be working off of today. So as for the color, it was very warm on this day. So I'm gonna bring the warmth up and I'm just gonna give it a little bit of a tint. Nothing crazy. I just want the greens to show up a bit more. Now we're gonna bring up the exposure a tiny little bit just for now. Also, if some of these adjustments don't look like they're changing all that much, that's probably because YouTube compresses the crap out of these videos and certain slight adjustments might not translate to your screen like they do on my screen just because of the YouTube compression. So keep that in mind. Now, first things first, even though this leaf looks pretty good, we can see that we've lost a lot of detail in this tree, especially in this arch, which is one of my focus points here. So I have two subjects, one being the leaf and one being the arch and the reflection in the water. So I want to bring back some of that detail. So to do that, we're going to bring up our shadows. Bring them up quite a bit and maybe bring up the blacks a bit. I've pretty much brought the shadows all the way up. Now let's see what difference that makes. Pretty much night and day. So now what we want to do is we want to start introducing a little bit more contrast. Just a tiny little bit. Get some of that detail back. We might be able to reset our exposure. No, I liked it better before. I liked it a bit brighter. If you come up here and you select these little arrows on top of the histogram, it'll actually show you your pure white and your pure black, and you kind of know if you've gone too far in one way or the other. I'll show you. I'll bring this exposure all the way up and it'll show pure white. All that pure white is in red, and pure black will be in blue, and that's pure black. So if you're ever messing around and you think something's too dark or something's too white, then you know by hitting these arrows, it'll show you if it is. Now we're just gonna introduce a little bit of clarity to the overall photo, just a tiny little bit. We're gonna add more clarity to the leaf and more clarity to this little middle section here. We're gonna bring up the saturation just a little tiny bit, bring in some more color. That's looking all right. We're gonna add some sharpening to the photo. We're gonna bring it up to around 40, and then we're gonna hit Option and drag this masking slider. And we really only want the sharpening to happen on the edges. Just gives the photo a little bit more punch. Now in the color mixer here, I'm just going to change the hue of the oranges just a little bit. Nothing crazy, just bring it down a little bit so we get more red up here. Maybe we'll change the tint of the green. We don't have a lot of green, but we have some over here. I'm just gonna add a little bit more hue to that. Let's go to saturation. We'll just bring up the saturation a bit on the orange. I think that looks pretty good. Now, if you come all the way down to the bottom to color calibration, this is where you can get some really interesting things to happen. So if I take the blue primary and I bring it all the way down, we get this really wonky orange and teal, and you bring it all the way up, you get this really weird alien looking green and purple look. But I want a little bit more orange and teal, so I'm just gonna bring it down a little bit, maybe add a little bit more saturation. We're gonna do the same with the red hue, see what we can do here. I actually think bringing it down a little bit here kind of breaks up all that color and makes it a little less orange, and it actually adds a little bit more depth to the photo. See, our greens are popping more, our red and our orange are way more separated than they were. That's the before and that's the after. So it breaks up the photo a little bit more and makes it a bit more interesting to look at. Now what I like to do is I like to add some masks. So our leaf is a focal point and this arch is a focal point. So we're gonna emphasize those. So I'm gonna grab a radial gradient, and I like to put a big feather on my radial gradients just so the effect disperses as it goes out. If you bring it all the way down, it kind of looks like a spotlight. It kind of looks horrible. You don't want that. So I'm gonna bring my feather all the way up. I'm just gonna introduce a little bit of exposure just to make the leaf a little bit more clear, a little bit more apparent. Maybe darken it a little bit. We have some absolute black here, but not a ton, so that's okay. I'm gonna change the tint of the leaf. That just makes it a bit more orange and kind of breaks it up from the background. Now I'm going to add some clarity, and you can see how much better this leaf is looking. It's a pretty crispy looking leaf. That's looking better. The next thing we're going to work on is this arch back here. So I'm going to get another radial gradient and just bring it across here. And I'm just gonna bring up the exposure on just this section. Make it a bit brighter, a bit more pleasing to look at. Now normally I like to add a little bit of a vignette and draw your eye in, but I feel the bottom of this photo is a little bit too dark. So I'm gonna bring one linear gradient up. I'm gonna hit Control C and Control V, and that duplicates that mask. I'm gonna rotate it and drag it to the other side, avoiding my leaf. And when you do that, it actually adds to the same mask. So it's not creating another mask, it's just adding another linear gradient on top of that same linear gradient. And I'm just gonna bring up the exposure here a little bit, just because I think that's a bit more pleasing. It was a little bit too dark in my opinion. But as for up here, I find this blue sky kind of detracting a little bit. So I'm just gonna bring a linear gradient down, and I'm just gonna darken it just a tiny bit. And I'm gonna desaturate it because that actually looks like it saturated the sky a little bit too much. Maybe I'll bring up the color temperature on it a bit. I'm thinking that looks a bit better. Color temperature up and brought down the exposure. Here's the before and here's the after. So it just adds a lot more punch to the photo. So we brought up the exposure down here a little bit, but I'm actually going to add a linear gradient and just darken just the very bottom. We brought up the exposure on here and here, but down here I feel is a little bit distracting, so I'm going to bring down the exposure there just to add a little bit more of a vignette to the photo. So if we hit L on our keyboard and we hit it one more time, that goes completely away. The whole background of Lightroom goes away and we can really look at our photo for what it is. And if you hit this backslash key, that's your before shot, and that's your after shot. And this looks much more pleasing in my opinion. We've really brought out the color and we've separated a lot of the colors, like the greens and the reds and the oranges. They all kind of speak for themselves now. And this leaf really stands out, but even with that radial gradient over it, it's not super noticeable. It just has clarity on it and a little bit of exposure. And it really makes the whole photo kind of work, in my opinion. If you guys like these Lightroom editing videos, let me know. Maybe I'll do some more of them. But in the meantime, subscribe. I'd love to see you guys back here hanging out in another video. Hopefully this video helped you, and you guys have a great day. Peace.